earlier video already or not yet?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay. I haven't checked.
Yeah, so if you look on the schedule, there is a playlist link at the top of it.
Yeah.
So you could just click on that. It would take you to the playlist for
Yeah,
it.
'cause I did it right after class. It was empty, so I haven't checked since.
It takes a while. Every time I upload the videos, it takes YouTube something like an hour and a half just to process
Oh, okay.
them. So
Okay.
yeah, but it's there. Should be there. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do this afternoon is, as I said, it's going to be kind of a continuation of what we were doing this morning. Not the exact same thing, but we're going to extend it. We're going to take it a little bit further. So I'm back here at Code Sandbox, which I showed you guys earlier, and I'm going to create another sandbox here, another vanilla JavaScript sandbox. Cool. And of course, it gives us this, this index.js file that we saw earlier today. What we want to do now, though, is kind of break things out into different files. We want to modularize our code a little bit. Rather than before, you remember we had all this messy code going down the page, right? It wasn't really maybe the most comprehensible or easy to read. So React has this concept that we're going to get into once we get into React, but it's this concept of components, which is we can create these reusable pieces of code and just use them in different spots, right? So if I have a component that maybe shows some information about a person, I can have that showing up on different pages, or I can use it multiple times on the same page, whatever it may be. So what we want to do today, or this afternoon, is kind of create our own little, quote, component library. So we're not really trying to outdo React or anything like that. We're just kind of preparing ourselves for what things are going to be like once we start to learn React, okay? So the first thing I want to do is create another file which is going to house a specific component that we're going to build. So down here, I'm just going to create a new file, and we'll call this button. Okay? So inside this button.js file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function that will actually create a button component. And you might think, well, why the heck are we going to do that? Like, I can just create a button in straight JavaScript. Yeah, but we're going to create a component that will make it a little bit nicer to work with, a little bit easier to deal with. Okay? So I'm going to create this function, and I'm going to do it a little bit differently than what you guys are probably used to seeing. So I'm going to say const button, and I'm going to set that equal to a function. Has anybody seen a function that looks like this?
ES6?
Yeah.
ES6 arrow function, right? Okay. So what I want this function to take in,
Can you make the screen bigger?
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Yes.
Now it's kind of squished. Let me just go like that. All right. Okay, cool. So what I want my button to take in is going to be a couple things. The first thing that I want it to take in is just going to be an object. Okay? I'm going to call this object props. Does anybody know why I might want to call it that? Properties. Yeah, it's the properties of the button that I'm creating, that I want to pass in. Okay? The other thing that I want to pass in is going to be a DOM node that I want to attach this button to. Okay? You guys remember what DOM node we were attaching things to earlier? The document's body, right? That was an actual node. So I'll take in this node here. All right. And then what I want to do is, the first thing I need to do is actually create a button, right? Do you guys remember how we do that? So yeah, I can say something like const button equals document dot create element. Let me see if I can, there, okay. It's a little better. So we're creating a button. Cool. And then what I want my button that I'm creating to have some kind of inner text, right? Because it wouldn't really be much of a button if I had nothing inside of it. So where do you think I'm going to be getting my text to apply to the button? It's got to be coming from one of these two guys, right?
Right.
I'm getting it from props. Okay? So let's do something like this. We'll say button dot inner text equals props dot children. And you guys are probably thinking, like, why is he saying children? Okay. Props, again, is just this object that has some different key value pairs in it, and children is going to become important once we get to React. The idea of children means whatever's sitting inside this element that we're creating, right? So if I'm creating a button element, the children is just going to be whatever's inside that button element. All right. Now, the other thing that we may want to do, so if we have a button and we've established what's inside of it, do I also want to be able to handle what happens when a person clicks on that button?
Yeah.
Probably, right? Otherwise, the button's pretty useless if it doesn't do anything. So, how do we want to do that?
You got to do it for the event.
I've got to add one of those event listener, right? Just like we did earlier today. So we can say button dot add event listener. Okay, what's the event that we're listening for?
Submit.
Click. Click this time, yeah. So if it was a form, we'd be listening for submit. And then what we want to do is we want to have some kind of callback function here, right? Like when that button is clicked, what do we want to have happen? Well, instead of me hard coding it in here, I'm going to say we're actually going to get this from our props object, right? So whenever I create one of these new buttons, I can basically tell it, what do I want the click handler to do? So let's get it from props. We'll say props dot handle click. Okay. And then finally, the important thing that we're going to need to do, how do I actually get this into my HTML? I've got to append, right? Now the reason why I've taken in this node here is so that I know where I'm trying to append to. So now that I have a reference to some node, I don't know what it is up front, then I can use that append child method and then append this button right here that we've just created, right? Okay. So let's do that. We'll say node.append child button. Okay. Now I've got this button function right here in this file here. How can I export that so that my other file can get a reference to that function? Anyone know? Export button. Okay, so there are two things that I can do. I can either say export default button. And what that means is that if I import from this file, automatically I'll get this button by default. Okay? The other syntax that you guys might see here and there is going to be something like this. I can say export, and then I can pass one of these literal JavaScript objects, and then inside there I can put my button. Like that. Okay. I'd say probably we're going to do the export default button because right now the way this file is fully centered on this button component, right? I mean, there's really nothing else that we're passing out, so let's just export that by default. All right. So I'll comment that out, and then if I go back into my index.js, how can I grab a hold of that button function that I just created? Yeah, requires is a good idea. However, we're not in a node environment right now. We're actually doing front-end stuff, so we can use the import keyword. Okay. So I can say import button from, and notice how it's at the same, hopefully you guys can see this, It's in the same exact directory as our index.js right now. So what the this dot slash that I'm putting means is that from the same directory that we're in, I want to import button. Okay. And then if I just wanted to say console log out this button, let's do that. And then I can go down to my console down here. You see button is actually the function that we wrote in that other file. And you can open it up, function. All right, good deal. Oh, how do I get rid of this?
You can slide it down.
Why can't I just press
Or that little caret on the far right.
this one?
No.
Oh, this right here?
Yeah.
Ah, good call. Yeah. Sometimes the interfaces throw you a little bit. All right, cool. So now if I want to create a new button, what should I do? This was just a function in the other file, right? So
Right.
all I need to do is basically invoke this function. Okay? So let's call it. So let's say button, and then I need to pass in, as it's telling me here, some props object, and then also some node that I want to attach it to. Okay? So let's create this props object. And inside there, as you guys might recall, let me just close this out here. We're looking for a prop called children. Remember? That's what's actually going to show up. Oh, it's airing out right now. We're looking for this thing called children, which is basically going to be what is the text going to be inside the button, right?
Right.
So let's give it to it. So let's go over here. We'll say children is going to be click me. All right. The other prop that we were looking for is this one called handle click. You guys remember what that's going to do?
Whatever happens when you click the button.
Yeah. So anytime we're adding an event listener, what our function needs to take in is going to be the event itself, right? So it's going to be a click event. We can say this will be a function that takes in some event. Wow, bless you. And then we're going to just console log something out. Nothing big right now. Let's just say console.log, and then inside there we'll say clicked the click me button. All right. Oops, don't want that in there. All right, and then what was the second argument that I need to pass this button function? The actual node where I want it to be mounted, right? So I can say document.body. Okay, so now I've got this click me button here, and that's nice. And if I click on it, you'll see we're actually getting this console log, right? Clicked the click me button. All right, cool. Any questions about what we did so far here?
Can I see the rest of the functions?
Yeah, well, they all went away. What's happening is that the code is basically refreshing every time I make a change to it, which means that whatever we had in the console is going to go away. But if I click on it again, you'll see it start to pop up again. So I'll get all those logs again, right?
Are you using ES6?
Yeah, so this kind of syntax right here where we're using arrow functions, that is ES6 syntax.
Can you use the old version ES5 or this or not? You just need
Yeah, you can't remember earlier today I didn't use any arrow functions. Yeah, you could use ES5 and it would still work. I'm just showing you guys a different syntax because you're basically gonna get used to using those arrow functions, and you'll see them a lot in the platform and in the curriculum. So I want you guys to just get familiar with them.
So what does it actually mean then?
What does what mean?
Arrow function. It's just how to put rid of what the
It's slightly different than ES5 in that We don't have to use the function keyword, right? The other thing is that it changes the this context a little bit. We're not going to get into that because that tends to confuse people a lot. But basically, when you define an arrow function, you can either use it as an anonymous function or you can create it as a named function like we did right there, where we established a variable and then we set it equal to that function, right? Versus when you when you use the function keyword, you're generally creating a named function. But these arrow functions come in handy a lot in what's called functional programming, where I just need a function to do something. Like earlier today when we had a map situation, I could have easily passed in an arrow function in there. I didn't really need to have a named function. I did a named function just like for the sake of clarity so you guys could kind of understand what was going on. But a ES6 arrow function would work very well for that. All right, so we've created this button component. That's pretty nice. What if I want to create another button? No problem, right? I can create a new button that uses this exact same structure, but that maybe has different text on it and that logs something different. So let's do this. We'll say button. And then the children this time around will be my second button. Handle click. Okay. Notice how we weren't doing anything with this event right here? Do I really even need to take that in if I'm not touching it? Doesn't matter. Not really, right? So I can just do an empty set of parentheses and say console.log clicked my second button. Okay? And then again, as the second argument, we need to tell it where do we want this thing to be mounted. So I can just say document.body again. So that's where I want it to go. Okay, and I've got my second button right here. If I open up my can't even click on it. So I'll click on the first button first, second button second, and you'll see here in my console, sure enough, click the click me button and then click my second button. Okay? Can I have thumbs on this? Does this make pretty good sense to you guys? Ooh. All right, I want clarifications for you, Mike. You too, Stefan. Okay, you guys are good back here? All right, good. All right, Mike. Clarifications. So the button code's back in here. How about this? Read through it line by line. Can you see it okay?
Yeah. All right. So, starting with const button. Const button equals document.
So what's happening here? Const button means what?
It's just like a variable.
Yeah, you're declaring a constant variable, right? Okay. Good. No, I was pointing out here, so let's get explicit about what's going on here.
Okay. Button equals props. And common node.
Well, specifically, what are we setting this variable button equal to? I heard it over there.
Yeah, function.
A function, right? Okay. The function takes in what?
2 arguments.
Good. Called.
Props and node.
Good. Right. Now, is this function being invoked right now?
No.
No. Right? So we actually go down here, right? And then we're doing what?
Export default.
Yeah, meaning that when I import from this file, what I'm importing specifically is going to be this function, right? Okay, cool. All right, now let's pretend like we're in the other file and we've actually invoked this function. What happens now?
So creating a button variable and
Notice the casing's a little bit different here because you guys might be a little confused. Like, wait a minute. They're not the same thing, right? This button variable is lowercase. Not the same.
So you're creating a button, and then create element is creating a button.
Good?
And you're calling that props.children. It's like a method for props or something.
No. What's happening here over on the left side on this line? We're saying I want the inner text of this button to be equal to whatever I set it to, right? Okay, what am I setting it to? Hey guys, shh. So props is what, but what kind of data structure is props?
It's an object.
Right. So what you guys were doing in Python, we knew those as dictionaries, right? Very similar. So it's an object, and then it has this property called children, right? Okay. So when we invoke the function and we give it this props object, we're going to need to say what the children property is, right? So let's say I've invoked this function and I said the children is going to be Mike, right? So what that's saying is the inner text is going to be Mike. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, next line.
Button.add event listener click.
Yeah, and then it's kind of hard to see over here, but
Props.handle
props.handle click. Okay. So again, that props object that we've passed through is going to need to have a property called handle click so that we can create this event listener. All right. Cool. And then finally, on line 7, what are we doing?
Passing in button to the method.
Okay. So what kind of object is this node that we're taking in here? It's a DOM node, right? Well, a document object model node. So it's something that the JavaScript knows how to work with because we're in a browser context. So we're saying from whatever node that we passed in, we want to append this new button that we just created.
Excuse me, what was that click, the green one?
So that's the type of event that we're listening for. Specifically, we're listening for a user to click on that button. If we were listening for something else, we would put a different event name inside there.
Is there any way we can check how many property that we have under props?
Yeah. Yeah, so we could do that. So if we wanted to know, I'll just do something like this. Up in here, I'll do console.log object.keys, and then I'm just going to pass in props. Okay, so then if we look at the console here, we'll see how it's giving us the 2 keys that props has in it? If I wanted to know the actual number, since it gave me that back as an array, I could just put .length, right? 2 and 2.
Because you have 2 buttons.
Hmm?
Because you have 2 buttons.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Say because you have 2 buttons. It's 2 for the first button and 2 for the second.
Yeah, exactly. It logged twice because I created 2 of them. Exactly. Good. All right, Stefan, I think you had some clarifications. Do you feel a little better now?
The click part, I don't get the click part to that. I mean, the click part over there.
This part right here?
Yeah.
Okay. So all we're saying here is when we add an event listener, we're just specifically listening for this type of event. Okay? So every time a person clicks on that button, we want to handle it in some way. That's what this part over here is. The second argument is going to be what callback function do we want to run once the person clicks on the button. Is that a little better? it's very similar to kind of what you guys were doing in your Django routing. Remember how we would have a route as as the first argument, and the second argument would be what function do we want to run when we hit that route?
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, exact same thing.
Well,
Mhm.
Can you have, since this is a button, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to assign it to a form, we wouldn't just want to hear listen for a click. It have multiple event listeners.
Yeah, you can add more than one.
So I could have like a click and then a submit. Depending if I want to use that button on the form or just in the body.
Yeah.
So we'd have to create two separate buttons.
If you wanted them to function in different ways, you'd want different buttons.
Okay.
Probably, right? So if we wanted to have like a cancel button or something like
Sure.
that, you would have a separate one.
Separate buttons.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So everyone feels pretty good about this, though, right?
Can
No?
you just see the rest of the create element?
Second. This right here, the button part. So this is just what type of HTML element am I creating? That's all. Okay, so if we were creating a form, same thing, we would just pass in form right there, the string form.
Can you explain again why you have to export the default button?
Well, we have to make the code available to whatever file is going to be using it, right? So there are two ways of doing it. We can either export it like this, where we export an object that has some different functions in it or different things. They don't have to be functions. Or we can just export default, meaning that this is the only or the main thing that's being exported from this file.
So we cannot directly use it, just import it from other files. We have to export it first.
Correct. Yeah, so if I wanted to use the other syntax there, what I would do, I'll uncomment this right here and then comment this. And then in here, instead of importing button like that, I would actually go like this. Okay? So when our file is exporting an object and we want to get just some part of that object, we would use this destructuring syntax right here. Okay? Meaning I just want to pull this button part from that file. I don't need to pull everything else that's being exported from the file.
What would happen if it did, what kind of error would we see if it didn't have that?
Well, what's going to happen is that button is basically going to be undefined, right? And then when we're trying to invoke something that's undefined, you're going to get an error.
Right. So then we wouldn't see anything on the
Correct.
XML side.
Yeah, exactly. So if I take out these little destructuring guys, oops.
Okay.
See, so it's saying button.default is not a function because whatever that thing is, what it's exporting right now is actually an object.
Correct.
So if we're trying to call an object as a function, well, you're going to have a problem there.
So we can use this type of import if, say, we had multiple buttons defined in that button.
Exactly. So if I had like button type 1 and button type 2 in that file, I can export them all in one object like that, and then I can import whichever one I wanted to use, like this. Yeah. All right. Cool. So the other thing that I wanted to show you guys too, so this is, React has these two different types of components that we're going to be working with. There are class-based components, which use the familiar class syntax that you guys have seen before. And then there are functional components. This button that we created over there, that's sort of an example of a functional component, okay? Because we were just creating it straight from a function. What if I wanted to create a class-based component? Okay? Let's see how we can do that. So I'll create another file over here. And let's see, we'll call it, I'm going to call it counter. Okay? And what we're trying to do with our counter component is we're just going to have a little sentence here just saying, like the button has been clicked however many times. And then right underneath that will be the button that we can click on to increment that counter. Okay, something super simple. All right. So what I can do is I can use the class keyword here to create my class. All right, that should look pretty familiar to you guys, although if you're coming from Python, how did we do our classes in Python? You guys remember? I know it's been a long 2 weeks, but with a colon, right? Yeah. So here we're introducing our class with a set of curly braces here. And then inside there, we also want to typically have some kind of method that will run when we first create this thing. Remember, what was that called in Python? Init, right? So in JavaScript, when we're creating these guys, we can have a constructor method. Okay? And then inside this constructor, we could take in something similar to what we were doing with our functional component. We could take in some props, and we can also take in a node that we want to attach this thing to, right? Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do inside my constructor is I probably want to create some sort of a div just to hold all of this stuff. So I'll just say, let me get this out of the way. We'll say const container equals document.create element div. Okay. And then inside that div, again, what I want to have is basically a p tag. So we'll say const p equals document.create element p. Okay. And when we first create it, how many times has that thing been clicked? 0, right? So let's actually establish this up here. Let me just go up here. I'm going to say this dot count equals 0. Okay? Are you guys comfortable with what this means in this context? What do you think it references? Yeah, the actual object, right? The counter object that we're creating here. All right. And then what I want the P's inner text to say is going to be like this. And I'm going to use these backticks here. I'll explain why in a second, but I'm just going to say the button has been clicked. And then in here, if I put the $sign and then these curly braces, I can actually put in some variable, right? This dot count times. Okay, the reason why I use those backticks there is because I actually wanted to interpolate some variable inside my string. All right. Now, if I want to actually get this added to my container div, do you guys remember how I do that? I'm going to do container.append child, and then I'm going to pass in that p tag, right? Okay. The other thing that I want to have is I want to have a button inside here that will act as my increment thing, right? So let's create a button.
Wait, you're appending the p tag onto the div?
Yeah. Does that not seem right to you?
Okay. So you're only passing the p tag, not the container, to the document. Oh, you're appending the p to the
I haven't yet appended the entire counter
Okay.
yet to the node, right? We'll do that at the end, though. We do need to make sure that we append it, otherwise, it wouldn't appear anywhere in the document. Okay, cool. So then, what I want to do is I want to have some kind of a click event that I'm listening for in the button, right? So again, I can say button.add event listener. Oh god, that looks terrible. Okay. Now I'm going to create an arrow function here to handle. Wow, why is it doing that? Jesus. Okay, so when we click on this button, what are we trying to do here with the count?
Increment.
Trying to increment it, right? So I'm going to create this arrow function again, and we'll say this dot count plus plus. Okay. All right, and then finally, what we want to do are actually two things. The button hasn't yet been appended to this container yet, right? So we do need to append the button. So let's say container append child button. All right. And I also need to append the actual container itself. So we'll say node append child container. Okay. Why is it not rendering anything just because I'm not using container or counter? All right, never mind. Yeah, I guess that's a severe error. Yeah, no worries though. So we've got this class counter. Let's say I want to export that as the default export from this file. So again, I can say export default counter. Okay.
We don't need no semicolon at the end, right?
No, it's not required. JavaScript is quite flexible as far as where semicolons are required or not. Some people try to avoid them like the plague. I'm not one of those people, but you might see that out there in the wild. Yeah. Yeah, in the forest. Okay. So let's what was going on here? Why did our output disappear? Did I mess something up?
Did you revert the button back to the default?
Maybe I did.
Oh, no.
Should still be okay, right? If
Yeah, I mean, you had it that way, so now we gotta take the little thing.
okay, yeah, if I take off these destructuring curly braces. Huh. Yeah, that was weird. Seems like it still should have been working okay at that point, but whatever. So let's also import this counter, right? So we'll say import counter from /counter. Okay. And so we're going to come down here and we're going to actually create a counter or two. So let's say new counter. Does anybody know why I'm using the new keyword here? Yeah, exactly. So we're invoking this constructor function of our class. So I'm going to say new counter, and then props could be anything. Right now I'm just going to pass in null because we don't have any props. The node is going to be what again? Where are we mounting this guy? On the document.body, right? Okay. So I've got the button has been clicked 0 times. I've got a little bit of a problem here. What do you guys think I forgot to do?
You gotta pass the text, the inner text.
I forgot to actually give the button some inner text, right? So let's go do that. Let's go back to our counter here, and then we'll say the text of the button. Oops. Okay, so we'll say button.inner text equals increment. Okay? Cool. So what's going to happen when I click this button? What am I expecting to happen?
You get another line that will have a number for the word time.
All right, so you're expecting this to change to 1, right?
Yeah.
Something like that, okay. All right, let's click it and try it. Huh. Nothing's happening. Why do you think that is? What's not being refreshed specifically? Let me ask you this. When we wrote a click handler to increment the count, did we change this text in any way, shape, or form? No, we didn't, right? All I did was I changed that this.count to, I incremented it, but I didn't actually change this text that was in here. Okay? This is where something like React or Angular or Vue or whatever front-end framework you're using is going to do so well for you, which is that it's going to manage a lot of the, I don't want to say quirks, but a lot of the small little housekeeping things that you need to do when you make some change to the state of your application. So if I increment that count, well, it's not changing this text. It's only changing this.count, right? So let's see if we can fix that. So inside of our counter, when I increment this.count, I'm going to want to change the p.innerText to this, right? All right, now let's try that again. Now it's working as expected, right? And I can actually create multiple counter components if I want, because again, these are like reusable code blocks. So if I go back to my index.js, I can create another new counter. Again, just doing it on document.body, and these counters are going to be completely independent from one another. So I can click on this guy and increment that. That's not doing anything to my top counter, right? Or I can click this guy, and they're totally independent. Okay. Now, if I want to clean this up a little bit more too, what I could do is I could have, because if you notice, am I repeating myself a little bit inside here? Yeah. So maybe I can write an actual method that will do that for me so that I don't need to repeat myself. So let's just do, we'll create a method down here called updateText. And then inside there, we're going to want to update the p-tags inner text to this. Okay. However, let me ask you this. Do I have a reference to this p variable inside this new function we created? No, I don't, right? So how can I rectify that? Parentheses? How about if we attach that p tag to the actual object? And then we would have access to it in this other method, right? So up here where I'm creating this p tag, what I can do is I can say, somewhere in here, I can say this dot p, or let's say this dot p tag, just for clarity, equals p, right? Okay. So what that'll do is that'll allow me to use this dot p tag inside this other method. Okay, so now I can say this dot p tag. So instead of doing p dot inner text, what can I do now? So right here on line 7, where we're saying explicitly p dot inner text equals this string, what if I just invoke that other method that I just wrote? Right? The update text method. Let's try that. So let's go this dot update text. Parentheses means what, guys? We're calling that method. Right? Cool? And then I want to do that in one other spot, which is going to be inside this event listener, right? So instead of all of this, we can just say this dot update text. Okay? All right, and then
You showed up for a second?
It was supposed to be .inner text here. That's why I was getting that kind of issue. P tag is undefined. Did I spell it wrong or something? Where did we update that text? Oh, geez, my bad. Okay, so what happened was we tried to update the text before we actually assigned this .p tag to that, right? So order does matter. No, it certainly did not. All right, so let's move that here. So now you can see that this thing's still operating the way that we expected it to. We've just kind of cleaned it up, right? Because when we're writing code, we don't want to be repeating ourselves. All right. That's pretty much all I got for you guys. I didn't want to keep you too long. Yes?
One question for the P tag, I saw that you didn't declare it before you assign anything to it. So I'm guessing that's like a default global variable.
You mean line 6 here?
No.
Which?
Line, like say like line 3 and the line 9. Like
3 and 9.
you didn't declare account before you start to assign stuff to it, so I'm assuming that it's a default global variable.
No. No, it's not default global in any sense. I'm just saying I want this object that I'm creating to have a property called count, and I'm going to set that equal to 0.
So that's not a variable. That's like declaring it.
Count is now an attribute of the object. All right, so hopefully seeing kind of how we have a building block and we can use it in multiple places, that will show you guys what the power of React is going to be when we unleash that full power, which is that we can have all these things that we're reusing in different places in different ways. We can make them sort of as customizable or as set in their ways as we want them to be, but it allows us to build an application from a lot of little smaller pieces, right? And right now, there's a lot of sort of pain in the butt stuff that's going on right now, which is like, oh, every time I increment that thing, I also need to change the text. Well, once we get into React, we'll see that it actually handles that for us. We'll just be able to tell React, we want the page or the component to look like this, and then it will do a lot of that back end work for us. Right? How about thumbs on counter? Better that time? Hey AJ, I don't even see your thumb. It was like a face ball. Jesus. Alright, question. Can we use let instead? For which one?
If we make the constant same or something, or the constant.
Yeah, I can use let for that.
Okay.
But why would I though? Because is this actual object ever going to change? It's always going to be this DOM object that I created, right?
Yeah.
So you would use let when you're going to want to reassign that thing at some later point in time. In our code, we're not going to reassign it at all. It's always going to be that thing, right?
Also, look, did you have to do something special to the HTML bones? I guess
Bones?
No, I mean, like, you have to do something special for it to the refresh so dynamically, or just because?
That's happening because we're in Code Sandbox.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Code Sandbox is doing that for us every time we make changes. It's doing that. Now later on, when we're using this thing called Create React App, that will also dynamically reload for you. So it'll make things really easy. All right.
Even the new Dreamweaver does that. It just updates automatically. It has like a live view of what your code.
Dreamweaver, huh?
Yeah, Dreamweaver.
I haven't looked at that one in a while.
I used it when I was in high school.
Yeah, I know. It's been around for a little while. Okay.
I don't want to do a subscription. I just want to own it.
Okay. I can't blame you. Those Adobe subscription fees are no joke, right? Yeah. Okay. So on this side, let's see thumbs for you guys.
It's sideways. Just because, like, I got lost a bit.
Yeah, I got lost too, and I just closed the laptop.
It's
It's too squishy.
All right. So again, I'm gonna post this up for you guys. You can even fork it and like create your own version and play around with it if you want. And then maybe. Yeah, fork is like you're going to create your own little version, and then you can do whatever you want with it. But Code Sandbox is a really nice tool as far as just playing around with some ideas, you know. So this will get us kind of used or just ready for what React's got in store for us, right? All right, cool. Yes.
When you say that, like, are we gonna? Where would we see the code? I guess in the video or just?
Well, I'm going to post it on Mattermost for you.
On Mattermost.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I posted the one from earlier today too. Yeah. All right, you guys good? Any final questions? No? All right. Thank you.